in the title of this session, it also mentions that we're supposed to touch on elections. So I'll quickly start just by saying what I think is obvious to everyone, but I'll reiterate it because I think it impacts the environment in Washington right now, which is that the presidential race is very much going to be a toss-up. And regardless of where your political leanings are, I think what happens over the next few months with the economy, some other things, are really going to have a huge impact. And as a result, a lot of activity in Congress is going to be put off. Because if you're on the Republican side of the aisle, what you're saying to yourself is, we don't want to compromise right now because the entire game might change come November, both with who's in the White House and the executive branch, and also who's got leadership in the Senate. Similarly, if you're on the Democratic side, I think the hope is that this 2012 election has the chance to affirm the leadership that's been shown by the party over the last 4 years, and that next Congress will provide more of an opportunity to get some cooperation, perhaps signal a mandate. So my point in saying that is there are a number of issues that impact all of you that are certainly on the radar screens in Washington right now, but I don't think you can expect all that much in terms of legislative activity between now and the end of the year. In spite of that, there are some things that are moving and some pieces of legislation that must pass. There was an agreement on student loan rates reached this week. There's a transportation bill that it's looking like is going to move. And then I think you're all aware of, as a result of the agreement that was reached earlier this year on the debt limit, that there was an agreement reached to cut spending on a combination of defense spending cuts and entitlement cuts if no other agreements are reached before the end of this year. So I do think that once the elections are over in the lame duck session, you're going to see some significant movement, and we'll obviously be monitoring that simply to ensure that our issues don't get wrapped up, and to the extent that they are wrapped up, that we're making sure that we're getting outcomes that are favorable for broadcasters. Just to start out on some specific legislative issues that are impacting all of you on the radio side, the first that I wanted to address is the performance tax issue. Now, as you know, for the last 3 Congresses, this has been an issue that has percolated. There have been efforts to change current law and implement a royalty fee for over-the-air radio play. We have successfully, as an organization, especially with the help of all of you, been able to fight off those legislative efforts. And in this Congress, a bill has not been reintroduced to implement what's termed a Performance Rights Act. But what we have been successful is in gaining significant support for a resolution that now between the House and the Senate is co-sponsored by nearly 200 members that opposes any fee for over-the-air radio. One question that we've gotten over the last several weeks is, in light of this latest development with Clear Channel coming to an agreement with the Big Machine record label, that includes some payment for over-the-air play, how is that going to impact the state of things in Washington? I think you can look at it from 2 sides, but what we have found as we have gone in and met with interested offices on these issues, both on the Senate side and the House side, is that this really signals, and I think we're able to communicate the message that it signals, the fact that congressional involvement is not necessary, that this is an issue that private parties and that the private market will work itself out, and this is an indication more than anything else that this should be left to the parties. What the characteristics that incentivize Clear Channel to enter into an agreement like this, and similarly that incentivize the Big Machine record label, which represents mainly country music performers, to engage in this deal is very different than what might be in the interests of other broadcasters. And that a one-size-fits-all legislative approach where suddenly everyone is paying a royalty for over-the-air play simply doesn't work. So We'll continue to monitor that. There was a hearing 2 weeks ago in the House that was chaired by Congressman Greg Walden, who is on the House Energy and Commerce Committee on the future of audio.
And a radio broadcaster.
Sorry. And at that hearing, we had two broadcast representatives on the panel that was being questioned by the committee, and I think Steve Newberry, who was representing the National Association of Broadcasters at that hearing, really sent the compelling message that the market is working, that all of you are innovating, that there are barriers right now to putting your over-the-air signals on the internet because streaming fees are so high that it's actually impeding innovation, which I think brings us to the intersection of what is best for you all and what's really trying to be worked out in Washington as to how over-the-air play intersects with web play. There is a court case right now where there's a decision expected to come down over the next few weeks challenging the constitutionality of the Copyright Royalty Board, which currently sets the rates for webcasting. Without getting into sort of the technical nuance of all of that, you should know that should the board be ruled by the court to be unconstitutional, we see that as a legislative opportunity to get some reforms for the rate standard. And that's something that we'll continue to monitor. And that, more importantly, what you should really know is that with both the over-the-air royalty as well as webcasting, we see some opportunities to do some things that are very favorable to you all. We're continuing to monitor it. The other issue that has occupied on the radio side a great deal of our time over the last few months has been our efforts to get Congress aware of the benefits of the radio chip and mobile phones. And I'm going to turn it over to Alan to discuss that.
Well, one point I'd like to add, and this will lead right into Alan, is that we NAB sat down with the RIAA and Music First Coalition at the end of last year, and this was a strategic move on behalf of the NAB to take some of the political pressure off of us to implement a performance tax. During that time, we offered them a set of terms. Included in that term sheet is the FM chip, and that would be tied into the percentage of penetration in mobile phones would correlate to the streaming rates we pay to the CRB. So that issue is on the table. That negotiation is in their hands. We haven't heard from them. So as Senator Smith likes to say, who's our boss, the ball is in their court in terms of the negotiating posture. But just that's where the FM chip lies right now in the congressional sphere. So.
Yeah. So. Over the past year, I think we've made some pretty significant progress on the FM chip issue. As Curtis and Jamie mentioned, really the focus is educating policymakers on what FM chip is, the fact that the chips are already in almost every phone and they're just not turned on. What's that activation process? What's the cost, et cetera? With Pat's leadership and the help of the staff at FAB, I think, again, we've made some really significant progress. We've met with all of the key policymakers, all of the leadership and professional staff that have oversight of the issue. In particular, Congressman Bilirakis was mentioned earlier. Congressman Bilirakis from the Pinellas County area chairs the House Homeland Security Subcommittee on Emergency Preparedness and Response, so there's an oversight function there directly with FEMA. Administrator Fugate, who's obviously formerly from Florida, or I guess he says he's still from Florida, just lives in D.C. for now. Longtime friend of broadcasters, longtime friend of Pat's. Obviously, they have a strong relationship. The administrator has been very helpful, very supportive. So, through that process, all that kind of culminated a few months ago. We had a roundtable in D.C. Chairman Bilirakis sponsored it. Hanson Clark, one of the minority members of the committee, joined as well. Members from NAB were there. Senator Smith was there from NAB. Pat joined in on behalf of FAB. And then other members of the wireless community, et cetera, were also in attendance. And it was a great conversation. It wasn't just about FM chip. It was about emergency preparedness and response in general. But I will tell you that FM chip dominated almost that entire conversation. I think the first 10 minutes, they talked about WARN Act and some other stuff. And then it literally went right into FM chip, and we spent the next hour talking about the challenges. The wireless industry obviously has their position. We have ours. But I think it was a really good meeting. I think we really had some strong... We walked away with a strong sense that the members around the table really have a better understanding of it now. I think in the next Congress, what we'll look to do is to have a similar hearing on the Senate side. Senator Nelson and Senator Rubio, as they mentioned, are both on the relevant committee. They've both expressed interest in the issue and holding a roundtable, so I think we'll continue to work on that, continue to work on other legislative mechanisms that may help. On a related note, similar to FM CHIP, obviously the beginning of hurricane season recently, 9 members of the House actually went on the floor of the House and gave floor statements on behalf of the broadcast community, thanking them and for their support, radio and television in times of emergencies. 2 of those members actually mentioned FM CHIP directly, so I think that was a great thing. That was a great step forward. That's kind of where FM CHIP is. Again, like they said, there's not much is going to happen for the rest of the year, legislatively speaking, but I think we'll continue to have those conversations and continue to push forward with it. So.
And let me make one point that I think underscores both of these issues, which is that when we're on the Hill talking about this, the reason that our issues resonate with members of Congress is that we're really able to convey the local service that all of you provide. That is the thing that differentiates you from, all of these other platforms that are out there to deliver music. And so I would simply urge you, I think it goes without saying, but you can't measure how much it helps us when we're advocating in Washington. When Alan's in there talking about the FM chip and what the benefits will be of having that chip in a mobile phone in a time of emergency when the cell towers go down. In order to get your signal across, which provides such an assistance and such a service to local constituents, we can't tell you how much it helps to have you echoing that message when these members are back home. They can hear it from us in Washington all they want. We can hand out all the talking points that we want. But more than anything else, actually being at home, listening to it on their radios. This carries into the television issues as well, obviously. But that is really what aids our efforts in Washington more than anything. And you guys do such a terrific job that we should thank you for that, because it's the only reason that we're successful in advocating on these issues.
Sure. So one quick, the previous speaker had me thinking about, pirate radio, which is funny because in the early 90s, I don't know if, I'm sure Bill knows this story, but the pirate radio advocates in Washington actually stormed the NAB building, took over the lobby, and put a pirate flag on our flagpole. And so I can tell you today we continue to fight pirate radio. It's not a dead issue, so hopefully it indicates we're doing some sort of a good job when they're raiding our building. So. No, does anybody have any radio questions or issues out there that they want to get answered? If not, we'll move on to the radio side. And again, if you have if you think of anything going forward, just stop us. A lot of the discussion in this morning's panels, which I thought were extremely useful for my own information, focused around the online political file currently ongoing at the FCC. I can tell you the OMB has recently decided that they're going to move forward with the FCC's plan to move the station's public file online. Included in that public file is obviously the political file. One point I wanted to correct from the earlier panel was that we're not actually putting these files on our station's websites. We will send that information to the FCC, who will then compile it and put it on a larger website over there. That structure has not been determined yet. We have no idea how it's going to work or how they're going to manage it. It's going to be extremely complicated. And so I'm sure there will be some sort of FCC workshops going forward to help educate us and help educate the stations on how this process is actually going to work. I can tell you the NAB is in the process of litigating the rules at the FCC, that we have realistic expectations of how that lawsuit is going to go. In addition to that, we have sent counter proposals not only to the Hill but also to the FCC. That would be a belt and suspenders approach to the public file, where our main concern, and I think this was echoed pretty clearly this morning, is the actual ad rates that each candidate or issue is actually buying. That's the heart of the issue for us, is when our competitors know the ad rates, that goes directly to our bottom lines, and they'll go to the next they'll go right to the cable company or to the online if they can get a cheaper rate. So what we're doing right now is it's called the TOC, which is a smaller operating group in Washington. We've sent the counter proposal, and this would be an opt-in proposal for television stations and potentially radio stations if the FCC wants to go that route. And it would instead of having the direct ad for the direct money for a single ad, it would have the aggregate of a candidate spends on a local station. So it would say, Senator Bill Nelson has spent X amount of money at WXYZ. And so that way we can, I think that's, the whole political issue behind this is transparency. The super PACs have caused Democrats in Washington to do anything they can to try to poke holes in the Citizens United case, and this is the most realistic policy path moving forward, since, as Curtis mentioned earlier, there's not much moving in Washington, and especially policy that's so political in nature as this. So that's the counter proposal that we have. It has a number of other issues related to it. I can, explain that to you offline if you have any interest in it. We've heard some from the FCC that there is some interest to at least listen to our arguments. And what they're needing right now is some Democratic support from the Hill. So that's what we're working on now, is just to find the kind of groundswell and the ground cover from the Hill we can give Chairman Janikowski if he were to at least listen to our counter proposal. So.
And I think just to add one other element to this, we're trying to cover all of our angles, both in exhausting our remedies to challenge this from moving forward in the first place. Jamie mentioned our legal challenge, but also there is some language that was inserted in the House Appropriations bill that funds the FCC that ensures that if this rule is implemented, that GAO needs to conduct a study to assess the burdens on all of your stations, and more importantly, the burdens and harm on competition that might result from this disclosure of your ad rates, but not the disclosure of the specific ad rates by cable, newspapers, and other advertising mediums. So. We are at a point right now where it looks like this is going to move forward, but know that I think some of these are at least providing a context where, when this is reviewed in a year or two, if it is the case that some of the harms that we've worried about do come to fruition, that we at least may have a record to go and point to, which may have some impact on the Hill and at the FCC.
And so 5 markets in Florida, you guys are probably the hardest hit state for this rulemaking. Again, the rules take effect 30 days after they're written in the public register. That hasn't happened yet, but we'll let you know exactly when that does happen. It's likely to happen. The date's going to be sometime in mid-August, where the rules would actually kick in and the stations would have to upload the information. So we'll keep you updated. I'm sure Pat and the NAB will have a constant line of communication going forward. A couple other TV issues just to put on your radar. Obviously, the spectrum issue was extremely a hot-button issue in the last Congress and the early part of this year. Thanks to all of your help, we crafted a policy that was comfortable for broadcasters, obviously going forward, in which we had concerns, obviously, with the FCC plans to repack television stations that do not want to or wish to participate in a voluntary incentive auction. We're comfortable with the guardrails which we wrote in there. Now the action is at the FCC, which is the unknown. There's many think there's a bias at the FCC against local broadcasting. And I think there's some truth to that, but we continue to work with them. And I think if you're talking to Senators Nelson or Rubio or any members of the delegation, it's imperative that they know that we need a significant congressional oversight through this process. One of the biggest issues right now is transparency. They have been unwilling to give us models in terms of repacking and how it might work. We have no idea how they're planning to deal with us in a post-repacked world. That's one thing we have a concern with. And we also want to know which stations, we don't want to know which stations, we want to know the number of stations that are inquiring about selling in a market, so we can then run our own models internally and figure out the best way forward with a repacking plan. So you have anything on spectrum, or we're good? Okay, we'll move on to retransmission consent. Yes, sir.
Has anybody contacted the Romney campaign on these issues? And would there be any change on any of this? Should there be a change in administration?
Sure. That's a really good question. I don't know if I'm speaking out of school here, but one of Mr. Romney's best friends is our boss, Senator Gordon Smith. So I'm sure they've had some sort of discussions. I'm not privy to those discussions, but I'm sure they've happened in some back room somewhere in Washington. No, but we have, I think, a better idea of Mr. Romney. He's been pretty I think, an open book in terms of telecom policy, where the state of Massachusetts didn't implement too many hot button issues. But if you want a better look of maybe where he would take this, his administration would be to look at Ajit Pai, who's the new commissioner at the FCC, who was nominated by Mr. McConnell, who's the minority leader of the Senate. As of right now, he still has the kind of tech-focused, young Hill staffer mindset, which doesn't tend to go our way many of the times. With that being said, there are many issues where he would work with us positively, which we haven't seen from this current makeup of the commission. So,
yeah, I think to Jamie's point, just realistically, as it pertains to these sorts of policy debates that pit one industry against another, a candidate that doesn't have a record on these issues, which for the most part Mr. Romney doesn't, is not going to be all that specific in laying out policy proposals because he doesn't want to alienate one of the two industries, frankly. I mean, I think to the degree that he can stay in the middle on this, certainly he has a more deregulatory stance, which in certain respects is beneficial to us on these issues. But more largely, I don't think we're going to get anything more specific out of him until after the election.
So the last issue we wanted to quickly run by you guys is the retransmission consent negotiations. I think, as most of you know, the television stations at least, we've had a fairly successful year of deals getting done. The unfortunate part is in a lot of those deals we can't publicize them just because it's part of the contract, it's part of the negotiations. So unfortunately, the cable, satellite, and telcos that run into negotiations that are tense and hard and everything we expect a negotiation to be, they go to Capitol Hill and they tell members of Congress that the system's broken. They tell Democrats that we can't jeopardize, we can't let consumers who pay for this, important service, we can't let them be blacked out by these negotiations and held harmless or held hostage by, these big broadcasters that want to squeeze every last dime out of cable systems. And then they go and they tell Republicans the exact opposite. We don't want any rules in this process. We need to clear the underbrush that this regulatory regime has been built on from the 92 Cable Act. So there's two different competing strategies from the MVPDs, which we fight every day on the Hill. There's been a number of hearings, the last being one in the Energy and Commerce Committee last week. It was the second hearing to Curtis's future of audio. It was the future of video. And Mr. Stearns had some concerns about a deal that was actually just finished today. I think I saw a trade press clip from it. It was DirecTV and a Gainesville television station, I think the NBC station in Gainesville. So that deal's done now. It was off for 2 weeks. And I think, the important thing is, since you guys have two senators, again, Senator Rubio and Senator Nelson, on the Commerce Committee, if they're home this coming week, it's 4th of July, they should be in every one of your stations, because if I was running for office, I would be too. It's imperative that they know the importance of retrans to local stations. First, when they say that consumers shouldn't be held hostage and blacked out from these deals, that's completely inaccurate. First of all, they have a number of different service providers they can choose from. And more importantly, our signal is never off the air. We're always there and we're always available. And consumers, they may not know that, but I think we need to do a better job on the Hill and back home to explaining, that's the the reality of the situation. And secondly, they need to know that this new, revenue stream in many cases is imperative to not only the bottom line of a local station, but what we produce every day. It goes hand in hand to, keeping local sports on local broadcasting, keeping, highly watched news programs, in the local market. Because if I think we'll show you a video in a second here, but what we do every day cannot be replaced. The Rokus, every new platform, which the last speaker spoke about, and I couldn't agree with his last point, which is they can't replace what we provide, and that's localism, and that's our relationship, what we have with the local community. So that's the importance. They need to understand that because they're getting hit in a number of different levels from the MVPDs, and they're spending a lot of capital and a lot of resources and a lot of PAC money to get their point across. So we need to counter with what our most beneficial and our strongest tool in the box is, and that's everyone in this room, and that's what we do every day. So
one additional point on this, and sort of the headwind that we face on this issue in Washington, is that the laws governing retransmission consent and governing broadcast more generally are 20 years old. And obviously the world has changed a great deal from the time that the 1992 Cable Act and the 96 Telecom Acts were written. And you have an entire new industry of mediums through which consumers access their video that those laws weren't written to contemplate. So what we face is this difficulty of evidencing the fact that as it pertains to cable and satellite providers, the current structure works, that this is a free market negotiation, these deals get done, while also insisting that both the FCC and Congress recognize that broadcasters maintain the ability to control all of your signals on these new platforms and mediums as well. And so on that latter point, an update to these laws wouldn't be a bad thing for us if we could ensure that we still maintain this control on the old platforms as well. So I think staffers understand that. It's very difficult to sit up there with a straight face and not acknowledge that the laws probably need some updating, but I think this can be done and crafted in a way that benefits us both on the MVPD side as well as going forward on all of these types of devices. What's paramount and what I think is resonating with members on the Hill is that there need to be incentives out there for you all to keep doing what you're doing. And in order to make your service to the communities a viable one as a business matter, these retransmission consent dollars are essential to it. So, as you have these members in your stations, especially as we get into August recess and they're back home campaigning, what's really critical is that you're evidencing what you are doing to fulfill your obligation to service the public, because that's the greatest narrative that we can tell as proof being in the pudding that the system is working.